Pray God will bless some way out of this mess. We must take America back.
And welcome to the John Stadtmiller show here. John is unfortunately a little bit under the weather, and we all wish him well. We're going to send him a bottle of Nano Silver and hope that he starts feeling better. There's been a nasty flu just making its way all over the country. It was out here in Hawaii a while back, and it is a nasty, nasty one that we're all dealing with, and so we all wish get well soon to John Stadtmiller. And my name is Michael Rivero. For those of you who don't know, I have the show that's on just before this one. And we're going to talk about a lot of the same things on this program as well. But the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, as of right now, the appeals court in San Francisco is hearing arguments on Donald Trump's travel ban. And I'm emphasizing that word, the travel ban. It's not even really a ban. It's a moratorium. It's not permanent. They have a moratorium in place while they work out some new vetting procedures. That's it. The corporate media is being very dishonest when they call it a Muslim ban, because it isn't. It's a ban on specific countries that do not like the United States of America, probably because we've been dropping bombs on them for a while, and they are known hotbeds of terrorist activity. And if you are in one of those countries and you try to come to the United States, you're going to run into some difficulty, and it doesn't matter if you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, Pastafarian, Scientologist. It is not a religiously based discrimination. If you are coming from a country that is not on the list, you're not going to have any problems. Canadian Muslims are still going back and forth in and out of the United States without any problem whatsoever. So anytime somebody says it's a Muslim ban, you need to correct them on that misperception, because that's not what it is. It is a travel moratorium on specific countries that represent a threat to the United States of America. And Donald Trump is legally in the right here, because Title VIII gives Donald Trump the authority to simply ban certain groups of aliens from coming into the United States of America. And that law is 65 years old. It's been used by other presidents before. Nobody ever made a stink about it back then. All right, getting into some other news here. If you're living in Louisiana, you might want to keep an eye out the window. There have been tornadoes down there, at least 3, in the area around New Orleans and Baton Rouge. And there's been a lot of damage already, and we certainly hope for the best for those people who are dealing with that down there. Now, Vice President Mike Pence cast the tie-breaking vote for Betsy DeVos as Education Secretary, and according to the Senate historian, this is the first time in U.S. history a vice president has had to break a tie on a cabinet nomination. So Pence is already in the history books, and he's out there getting to do the job that he wants to do. Now, the opposition to Betsy DeVos came from the public education sector, who does not want parents or children to have a choice of where they're going to be educated, because it means less revenue for them. But more and more parents are trying to find alternatives to the public school system, especially getting away from Common Core, whether it's a charter school, a private school, or homeschooling. They want the right to decide for themselves what is going to serve their children's educational needs best, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to want. Now then, apparently Elliott Abrams is being considered for Deputy Secretary of State. This has driven up a few eyebrows all over the place because he was tangled up in that Iran-Contra affair 35 years ago, which was the event that launched the Clinton-Bush narcocracy we've all been living under up until last November's election. And Abrams was convicted of 2 counts of withholding information from Congress. He was pardoned by President George Herbert Walker Bush, who was also up to this whole Iran-Contra thing to his neck. And he supported the U.S. invasion of Iraq and was involved in the failed military coup down there in Venezuela. So a lot of people are wondering just what's going on and what Trump may be thinking. Now, Rand Paul is standing up, and he's going to oppose Elliott Abrams for that state Department slot. Now, a lot of people are very concerned about some of the things Trump seems to be doing, and certainly they're alarmed at some of the harsh militaristic rhetoric that is coming out of the White House. But there's two things we need to keep in mind. Right now, Donald Trump is trying to get all of his nominees through the confirmation process in the Senate. And no doubt those nominees and Donald Trump himself are trying to say and do things that will convince the Senate to go along with what Trump appears to be doing. Because there are a lot of war hawk senators, in particular Songbird McCain and Lindsey Graham, that are very concerned Donald Trump may not be as pro-war as they would like him to be. So Trump may be gaming them. And so at this point, I'm going to exercise a little bit of caution and say we need to wait until the confirmation process is over and then see if Trump starts making some radical changes. And if he does, it means he was snookering the Senate. If he doesn't, it means we're on that same militaristic path here. And I'll be very honest, unless Donald Trump makes some significant draconian changes to the economic system of this country, unless he changes course from this path to war, Donald Trump could easily wind up being the very last president of the United States of America. It is that serious. Now, as you know, George Soros is out there acting like the supervillain in a James Bond movie, throwing his weight around, throwing his money around, and it has now come on out that last year Soros was funding Paul Ryan, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, John McCain, John Kasich, and Lindsey Graham. And all of those people were leading the charge within the Republican Party against the GOP nominee, Donald Trump. So we need to keep an eye on what's going on. I don't envy Donald Trump the job he's got. The entire liberal establishment hates him. The warhawk Republican establishment hates him. The corporate media is openly adversarial to him. He's dealing with a huge amount of bureaucratic inertia. And I think we're coming up on a point where he's going to have to start acting decisively and say there has to be change, because that's what he was promising coming in to the Oval Office here. Now, interestingly enough, over at Government Slaves, they're reporting on a new bill. It's being nicknamed the Drain the Swamp Bill. It's not as dramatic as it says. What the bill is suggesting doing is starting to move some of the federal government apparatus to outside that Washington, D.C. boundary. And, of course, this has already happened. CIA is outside Washington, D.C. The Pentagon is outside. And it makes a lot of sense. Now, back when George Washington set up our little capital area, and horseback was the fastest means of communication, it made sense to try and crowd all of these government agencies together to keep up the speed of communication. But in this day of instantaneous global electronic communication, it's not really necessary anymore. And so this bill is saying that they're going to take some of the federal government bureaucracy and they're going to relocate them to lower rent areas to save some money and to just deal with some of the gridlock and crowding within Washington, D.C. itself. To me, this makes a lot of sense. Now, in the final weeks of his term in office, President Barack Obama was commuting the sentences of drug criminals. One of them, Robert M. Gill, 68-year-old man, had a life sentence for heroin and cocaine distribution, and he was set free by President Barack Obama. He is already back in jail. He was caught trying to do another drug deal. The police spotted him, went on a high-speed chase, and he crashed his car, and he's back in jail. Good move, Mr. Obama, letting this guy back out on the street. And it's all the more angering when you consider that Obama let these hundreds and hundreds of drug dealers back out on the streets. Meanwhile, Leonard Peltier and Mumia al-Jabbar are still in prison for crimes they may not actually have committed. But they're an embarrassment to the system. And apparently you can be a drug criminal in the United States and you'll get your walking papers, but if you're an embarrassment to the power structure, you're going to rot in prison. Hillary Clinton is still trying desperately to find some way to bring herself back into public life. She signed up with the Speaking Bureau to do speeches at $200,000 each. I don't know about you. I have no intention of spending even a dime to see her speak. I've heard enough of her for one lifetime. She's talking about launching her own reality TV show, thinking that Donald Trump's The Apprentice is a big reason she lost the election. That's got nothing to do with it. First of all, I never watched The Apprentice anyway. Hillary Clinton lost the election because people don't like her and people don't trust her, but she can't accept that. So now she's out there. She sent a recorded message to the women's rights campaign group Makers, in which she praised the amazing energy of January's anti-Trump Women's March. Then she goes on to declare the future is female. Now, can you imagine what would happen if some guy got up on camera or microphone and said the future is male? Oh, the corporate media would just have a meltdown. They would excoriate this guy for daring to say the future is male. But Hillary can get up there and say the future is female. Yeah, that's fine. We don't have a problem with that one. Now, if you're a heterosexual white male and you feel like you've got a target on your back, you're not alone. It does almost seem like somebody has declared open season on heterosexual white males. Now, getting on over to the war zones, apparently Greece and Turkey may be coming to blows over some disputed islands in the eastern Aegean Sea. But like those little tiny islands down in the South China Sea, the issue isn't those little bits of rock. The issue is underlying tensions and hostilities that go back a very long way. The islands are just the excuse. Now, Turkey has been repeatedly violating Greece's air and sea space without permission, trying to provoke them. And it looks like that could definitely crank up here. Meanwhile, over in Ukraine, Sergei Kaplan, who is a Poroshenko deputy, was on TV basically telling the Ukrainian population they must prepare for a protracted war. And he came on out and said the Minsk agreements are gone. There will be no negotiations, no geopolitical shifts in the world. And we, meaning the Ukrainians, should learn to live in a state of war for the next few years. So they're out there rattling their sabers good and hard. What's really interesting, though, is the Ukrainian media and intelligence people are openly admitting that the renewed fighting in the eastern Ukrainian area began with a government offensive. And what Kiev is doing is very simply, they grab part of the rebels' territory, and then when the rebels try and take it back, Poroshenko screams, "It's Russian aggression! It's Russian aggression!" Now, Poroshenko has a very major reason why he wants to provoke that war. And it's more than just simply that's why he was put into control of Ukraine. Ukraine is out of money. They're broke. They're heavily in debt. Manufacturing was all in the eastern Ukrainian area. And they're in serious economic trouble. And Poroshenko is apparently thinking that if he can start a real war with Russia, money will pour in from the West to fund the war effort, and he can siphon off a little bit of it to keep the Ukrainian government running. And over at Veterans News Now, they're calling it Poroshenko's Last Chance Saloon, where he's acting like a has-been gunfighter trying to bluff down his latest meeting on Main Street at high noon. But they may be moving a little precipitously because an article out of Zero Hedge, Trump administration fails to back Ukraine, and they're talking about the telephone conversation between Trump and Poroshenko, basically saying there's not a lot of strong support, and in point of fact, because Ukraine has turned into such a nightmare, public relations disaster, that most officials in the U.S. just want to put it behind them and kind of pretend that it never really happened. Because there isn't much left there worth fighting over. Apparently, the Ukrainian army has a major morale and discipline problem manifesting itself as severe alcoholism. And even as they stagger around saying, we are the most powerful armies of Europe, apparently quite a few of them have managed to kill themselves by accident with their own hand grenades. And I imagine you got to be really in your cups to do something that dumb. Now then, Maxine Waters. Boy, if there's an example of how members of Congress do not represent the best and brightest in our population, she was out there giving a Russia-bashing harangue and about how terrible it was for Donald Trump to be trying to make friends with Vladimir Putin because, of all the bombs Russia gave to Syria that killed innocent children and families, and then she forgot the name of the city, in Aleppo. And first of all, it was the Western planes that were killing the civilians. Russia's aim is a lot better. Then she goes on, this is a direct quote from Maxine Waters, and the fact that he is wrapping his arms around Putin while Putin is continuing to advance into Korea, she actually said that. And I guess in Maxine Waters' mind, there's no real difference between Korea and Crimea, besides spelling, culture, language, and which continent they're on. Boy, oh boy, not exactly a stellar performance there, Maxine. Now, it looks like the U.S., or at least the Warhawks, not necessarily Trump, but the Warhawks are still trying to figure out some way they can get back into Syria. And there's a story that came out of The Guardian, supposedly citing a report by Amnesty International that 13,000 prisoners were secretly hanged in a Syrian jail. Many of them were tortured to death and starved to death and their bodies dumped in 2 mass graves. Sounds like it's really, really serious. But you need to remember, Amnesty International has a long and well-documented history of bias against non-Western nations. The report is written in obvious inflammatory language, suggesting it's less factual and more propaganda. In other words, it's the latest version of Assad is gassing his own people with sarin gas. Because if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. Motto of the U.S. government here. Now, speaking of lies, remember all this screeching and screaming about how Russia was tinkering with our politics and Russia was tampering with this, and nobody, of course, talks about how George Soros is tinkering with our political system. Nobody's talking about Israel's constant interference with our internal politics, because they're, after all, the good guys. We don't have to talk about them. But Russia, they're the bad guys. And Angela Merkel is trying to explain away her recent decline in the polls by saying Russia is meddling in German politics. The German spy agency BND launched a major investigation, could not find a single piece of evidence to support the idea that Russia was tinkering with Germany's politics. Russia doesn't need to. Merkel is in self-destruct. So's the whole EU. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And welcome back to our show here. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, Nigel Farage is wagging his finger at Parliament, basically looking at Parliament's recent statements about Donald Trump. And Farage is saying it's not just that Parliament appears to be anti-Trump. They seem to be becoming anti-American as well, because of this idea that we should basically focus our efforts on our own country and not become part of this global community of the New World Order. Of course, when you look at how wonderful the European Union has implemented this borderless society, you can understand why people are very, very cautious about that. But Farage is out there saying that there's supposed to be this special relationship between Great Britain and the United States, and all of a sudden, Parliament is just openly anti-American right now. Now, getting on back to Germany, there is a poll that was just done saying if the election in Germany were held today instead of this coming September, Merkel is going to lose by a wide, wide margin. And I'm sure she'll be out there screaming, "Oh, this is Russia! Russia's tinkering with our elections." And and again, she did it to herself, just like Hillary did here. Now, former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is facing a possible jail sentence. He's been charged with fraud, false accounting, breach of trust, running a corrupt election campaign. And this is also going to work in favor of Marine Le Pen, this further tarnishing of scandals, because Francois Fillon, who is Marine Le Pen's opponent, was once Sarkozy's prime minister, and he is already looking at possible prison in connection with giving his wife Penelope a fake job in which she was paid huge amounts of money without actually having anything to do. It was just plundering the French taxpayers' money for the wife. Now, figures released this week are showing the profits of the New York Slimes fell by more than 25% last year, because nobody likes a liar, and the last time something in New York fell this fast, it had to be thrown into a van by the Secret Service. Now, Marine Le Pen is out there taking the corporate media on head-to-head. She's learned a lesson from Donald Trump to just charge right on in. Was being interviewed by Christine Amanpour, who was out there screaming the propaganda that Russia stole Crimea, Russia stole Crimea. And Le Pen just got right in her face and said this was a coup d'etat in Ukraine. There was no invasion of Crimea. Now, we all know that there were two referendums in Crimea, the first to secede from Kiev, which is Crimea's right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Then there was a second referendum that said we want to merge with the Russian republics. The way they get from that to Russia stole Crimea is by simply saying we don't recognize the Crimean people's referendum, therefore by default Russia stole Crimea. Now, this is kind of like a father coming forward to say, I don't recognize my daughter's right to marry this man, therefore, by default, this man kidnapped my daughter and raped her. That's how this logic is working on out. But if you want to talk about really jumping the shark, you have to go over to MSNBC and Katie Tur, who came on out literally saying Donald Trump might start assassinating journalists. That's really getting on out there. And they're reacting very strongly to Trump's comment about, we're not the innocents everyone likes to claim we are. The United States has killed a lot of innocent people in all of these wars of conquest. The U.S. government has lied us into these wars. And, of course, the corporate media is, how dare you? How dare you dare to say such things about our government? We're the sweetest-smelling government in all of history. And I read it as yet another sign of the panic of the corporate media. They're losing control of the minds of the American people, and that means those big fat paychecks gonna go bye-bye. We'll be right back after these few words. And welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to the news here, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call from Andy in Texas. Aloha, Andy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Nice of you to take over John's spot tonight. I was hoping to talk to you earlier, but I was busy. No, the thing that I got here is, don't you think that if these politicians, so-called elected people who are from us, would actually be doing something for us? Basically what we've seen is nothing but a deterrent of our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And yet we still continue to put these people above us. That they're unlawful. The laws apply to just us. In reality, if these people were doing their job, that people would be knocking on my door every day asking me if I can work, and then when I said no, I already got a job, they'd knock on the next door and stuff. If they were literally for the people, by the people, this would be a flourishing country. Don't you agree with that?
In general, I do. There are specific complicating factors that we need to take into account. But the reality is, in a nation where you have a crooked election system, the politicians don't feel that they owe the people anything at all. Their first allegiance are to the donors who write those big fat campaign checks. That's why when this country was started, there were strict limits on campaign donations to politicians, because the idea was that the size of a candidate's campaign war chest was a true reflection of their popular support. And over time, these safeguards against the corruption of our government have been whittled away to the point where a lot of these politicians, they'll make a little bit of noise about fundraising from ordinary voters, but it's really more for show. And they cozy on up to the big bankers. They cozy up to George Soros. They cozy up to Adelson and all these other people to get these really big fat paychecks. And if they win office or steal the office, that's who they're going to be loyal to. That's why we were talking about this article earlier where Soros was funding John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Paul Ryan and all these other people, and they're taking their lead from him, not from their constituents.
Well, and so these people actually decided that their moral high ground is more important than the people that they're supposed to represent, which is very sad.
I think they decided there is no moral high ground. There is merely expedience.
Well, they actually have a moral high ground. Their morals don't correspond with any of the people in this country, but their morals are far surpassed ours because, I mean, don't you just want to live in a world where people are caring about other people and you know, we all come together under, you know, the same initiative as everybody, survival, and let's help everybody else out. I mean, that's really what the goal should be on this planet, don't you think?
I absolutely agree with you on that one. Unfortunately, the problem with political power is that it attracts the very sort of people who should never be allowed to have it. People who see political power as a way of enriching themselves at the expense of everybody else, of having power for the sake of power, for the ego feed. They go to bed at night dreaming that in the future there'll be a postage stamp with their face on it. And these are all really very bad motivations. It's kind of interesting to look through American history and realize that some of our best presidents were ones who became president without actually seeking the office, like Harry Truman. And so they weren't driven by these ambitions. They certainly weren't beholding to the same power players that put the presidents in there either. But again, the original model of the United States of America was that the power and authority rested with the individual separate states, and the federal government was limited to arbitrating between the states and, in time of war, assembling a common army. Other than that, it was supposed to be hands-off. But as we've seen in the European Union, which originally began as merely a free trade zone, those in power want to grab more power just for the sake of having power. And that's how we wound up in this nation where we're being ordered to stick vaccines into our children's arms. We're told we can't collect raindrops on our own property. And it gets really ridiculous. But this idea that they have to pass laws on absolutely everything to exert their control and justify their continued existence.
Well, do you see any correspondence to, let's go back to the Roman times? Do you think that the family members of the Romans, they've just been in power throughout and whatnot, and this is how we got to where we're at? Because these people seem to be carrying on one thing from another, and then let's just talk about the religious wars. I mean, we've had more wars based on religion. We're currently in a religious war, the Christians versus Islamists and whatnot.
Not necessarily. First of all, with regard to Rome, I actually see a lot of parallels between the decline and fall of the Roman Empire and the decline and fall of the American Empire, mostly unpayable debt, and the breakaway of the outer provinces, which is what all these wars are really about. Ultimately, all wars are about wealth and territorial control. Religion is often used as the sales pitch to get people to go on out and carry out these wars without demanding the high paychecks that this kind of work normally would justify. And religion is used to sell wars. It's very rarely the actual cause of it.
Well, I know you're an atheist and whatnot, but don't you think if this world could come under one God instead of having Buddha, Muhammad, and Jesus and all this stuff, if we could just come under one God, do you think we could unite?
No, I don't, because anytime you are allowing a system of belief to control your thought processes, you are not your own mind. And beliefs are intended to control you, whether it's a belief that Santa Claus will not bring you presents if you misbehave, whether you believe, again, in Buddha or the flying spaghetti monster, the belief that our government is good when all the other governments are bad, the belief that corporate media is being truthful, the belief that bankers and politicians are honest. These are all systems of control that are imposed on us. And I think the human race would be much better off if we banished all belief completely from our thought processes and just looked at the world as it really is and made our decisions accordingly.
And I concur with that. And on the last note, do you honestly think in your heart of hearts that Donald Trump is not a incumbent to Obama, that he actually has a motive to actually bring us back to freedom and truth and whatnot? Do you believe that?
I think Donald Trump wants to correct some of the things that he perceives as being wrong with this country. Unfortunately, it is very obvious that the establishment is trying to infiltrate and hijack his administration. As I said at the top of the show, we have to be very cautious about judging Donald Trump right now because he's still trying to get through the confirmation process with the Senate. And to do that, he's got to basically say what he thinks the Senate wants to hear, in particular the war hawks. So I'm waiting for the confirmation process to be over before I really start analyzing what he's doing.
Well, and I really think that he's got some good stuff going for him right now, simply because even though he's brought in some Goldman Sachs guys and these other people, they are insiders, so he's got a good inside idea. And perhaps these Goldman Sachs people were not exactly on the bandwagon with Goldman Sachs and whatnot, so I get that. But and you're right, we have to give this guy some time. I mean, we're almost 3 weeks into his inauguration and presidency, so we really have to give this guy some chance. I just, I'm hearing on these other radio shows and stuff, people are starting to doubt this guy and whatnot, and it's far too early for people to doubt him and whatnot. I think he's a fantastic guy so far. And, well, you know what, Mike? Thanks for your time.
All right, well, thank you very much here. And there isn't one more factor to take into account. Donald Trump is trying to find the people who are best qualified to do the job he needs them to do. In a lot of ways, it is not unlike General Patton in Germany after Germany's surrender, where he started using these Nazi officials in positions of civic responsibility, and it drew a lot of complaints from his chain of command, from the American media, from the American people, and he said, look, these are the guys who know how to make things work. These are the guys who know how to get the trains running on time, get the electric system working, get the phone working. If you can find me somebody qualified who's not a Nazi, I'd be happy to use them. And I think that is part of what's going on with Trump's dynamic. The issue is going to be whether he's going to be able to control them, because his job as president is to set the policy. And his underlings are there to enforce the policy, and if they don't, they will be fired. And Trump has already demonstrated a willingness to fire people that are not doing what he says to do. But again, right now, he's playing cautious. I think he's trying to woo the Senate and convince them that he's not going to change the war policy all that much until he can get his through the confirmation process. After that, what he does will be very, very telling indeed. We're going to take a phone call now from Fred in Iowa. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, a lot, but I'll be brief. I don't know who made this phrase or saying, but to do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different outcome is the height of insanity.
I think that was Einstein.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, my friend, do you think we've elected a president, the people of the United States? Do you think they've elected a president in the last 100 years? 50 years.
We know that election fraud is an out-of-control problem in this country. Back during the Bill Clinton administration, there was a book came out called Vote Scam by the Collier brothers, because after they'd made their fortune with the Hawaiian Tropic tanning product line, one of them ran for office and was defeated through election fraud, so they set about to document it. We know that there's that wonderful documentary on HBO, Hacking Democracy, which focuses in turn on this lady named Bev Harris and her website, blackboxvoting.org. But the reality is our election system appears almost intentionally designed to facilitate and then conceal election fraud. And so one of the things I'm focusing on for the next 2 years until the midterms is a totally transparent, honest, unriggable election system. Now, there's always going to be skullduggery, but you're going to have a lot less of it if you have an election system that is designed to try and make that as difficult as possible. And what's interestingly is that after I put out my original blueprint on how to have honest elections, I'm getting emails from all these other countries saying, we did what you described a few years ago. We got rid of those electronic voting machines. We got rid of tabulation centers where you're not allowed to verify the counts. And it is possible to have honest elections. You just need the political will to do it. And
yeah, I got. I say this. If all the voting machines were absolutely correct and fair, they don't have to have crooked voting machines, because we only have the choice of what they give us, Party A or Party B.
Well, I think last year's election basically destroyed that idea. Nobody wanted Donald Trump running. His own party was against him. And
that's
okay?
That's what they wanted us to think. You know, I can put you on the website.
Okay, I'm having trouble with your phone line, and I'll tell you what. We're going to let you go here because there's a lot of noise on the phone line, and I'm hearing a lot of echoes here. All right, now, as you know, Super Bowl was last Sunday, and that fourth quarter was really amazing. The come-from-behind victory of the Patriots. I haven't seen anybody blow a lead that badly since Hillary's campaign last year. But, of course, a big part of the Super Bowl experience are the commercials, because the very best of the best are going to be shown on Super Bowl because it is the most expensive ad buy. You're not going to buy a slot on the Super Bowl and put a really cheaply made ad there that's not going to be effective. And some of the ads were quite controversial. And one of the ones that was very controversial was Budweiser's ad that seemed to be pushing the open border immigration situation. Now, Budweiser is claiming this ad was put into production long before Trump announced his travel moratorium on these countries. But the ad basically is showing Adolphus Bush coming to America. He's poor. He's traveling up a river on a raft. He's being shouted at and jeered, and he worked hard, and he partnered with Eberhard Anheuser, and they created the Budweiser empire. And actually, much of that is a complete and total fiction, because Adolphus Bush was a real person. He did come to New Orleans from Germany, and he partnered with Eberhard Anheuser to start a beer company. Originally, they wanted to do a winery. Okay, but the rest is fake. Bush never traveled up a river on a raft. He didn't arrive in America poor. He was from a very wealthy family. He brought with him the money to start his enterprise. And even Anheuser-Busch is saying he didn't face the kind of discrimination depicted in the ad. Nobody was yelling at him, because when Bush came to the United States, at that point everybody was an immigrant. There wasn't any point shouting at each other. It was a complete fake. Now, the other ad that has caused a controversy was Audi, which basically was pushing the car and wrapping it in this bubble about, you know, how women do not make the same money as men for the same work, and how will my daughter ever be able to afford an Audi, blah, 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 blah. Now, that claim that women are making less than men for the same work has been debunked so many times, it is utterly irresponsible to keep repeating it. Wage differences based on gender have been illegal in the United States for over 50 years, and still the liberal pushes it to build their victimhood culture of women. I'm deprived, I'm deprived, I'm deprived, I'm deprived. And basically, I would not be surprised to see Audi's sales actually decline because of this ad. Now, turning to the economic news, it's looking bad over there in Europe. The Greek economy is on the verge of complete collapse from all this artificially created debt dumped on them by past governments and the private central banks. Now, you need to keep in mind that a significant portion of Greece's debt was artificially created with a fraudulent deal between Papandreou and Goldman Sachs, as an effort to conceal from the European Union how bad Greece's debt problem was at the time, in the process of which it doubled that debt and brought no benefits and services to the people of Greece. But to the money junkies, that doesn't really matter. Christine Lagarde over at the IMF, debt is holy, debt is sacrosanct, we don't care if it was created through fraud, you are bound by it and you will be our debt slaves. More or less what she's saying here. But Greece is seriously considering just defaulting on all these EU bailouts. And the reason is they're not really bailouts. They were just more loans. And you don't get out of debt by borrowing more money. That is the problem. We'll be right back. And welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news. We're talking about what's going on over in Greece. And part of the problem is that the demands for austerity have become so severe, it's paralyzed the country. Because all the money from the bailouts, which are really loans, comes right on in, and it goes right back out again. And the government of Greece has got nothing to work with to actually try and rebuild industry, tourism, whatever. And this is part of the damage caused by this money junkie thinking of the bankers, that all the money should be theirs, and you should live in perpetual debt. Now, meanwhile, up in Brussels, European Central Bank Board member Benoit Coeur basically said, it's not our fault Greece is in trouble. It's not our fault France is in trouble. It's not our fault Italy's in trouble. It's not our fault that Cyprus is in trouble. The euro is a great success. Well, if you're a banker up in Brussels, yeah, it's been a huge success. It's made you incredibly rich at the expense of all those other people. And the problem lies with the very nature of private central banking, in which private central banks, whether it's the ECB or the Federal Reserve, literally create money out of thin air, then they loan it into circulation at interest. And by means of this device, entire nations and their people are permanently trapped in debt slavery. Because the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to the private central banks than actually exists. There's no amount of work you can do, there's no amount of sacrifice you can endure that will ever get you out of that debt trap. It is by design. It's ruled by compound interest, and it's no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, it only works if you let yourself be brainwashed into believing this is the way the world is supposed to be. And the private central bankers have been playing this scam on the human race for 300 years. Enough is enough is enough is enough. Now, we are seeing gold prices start to head on up. 6.6% year to date, and it's only the first part of February. If it were to break out, you're going to see a flood of people emptying those negative interest savings accounts and their stock portfolios and getting into precious metals. And this sudden rise in gold prices is signaling market volatility, because there's a lot of gaming going on, a lot of manipulation going on. The stock market is hideously overvalued, more so than it was in 1929. Now, yesterday, Arizona came on out and announced they were going to have a bill that would make silver and gold accepted legal tender inside the state. Today, Utah said they're going to try the same thing. They're setting up internal parallel economic systems to say that you can use silver and gold coins or claim checks for same to carry on commerce without enduring interest to the Federal Reserve. And for those of you who don't know it, the Federal Reserve is not actually part of the federal government. It's no more federal than Federal Express. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And again, if you're expecting John Stadtmiller, he's a little bit under the weather, and we wish him get well as quickly as possible. My name is Michael Rivero, and I hang around here from time to time. Now then, we're talking about the economic news. Donald Trump campaigned on a promise to bring our jobs back to the United States of America. He is trying to do so. But unfortunately, the numbers are rather depressingly small, and he's not able to keep up with all of these large American corporations who are being forced to slash their staffs and close stores because of the realities of our economic situation. And even with the best of intentions, I am not sure that Donald Trump is actually going to be able to change our economic future in a significant way, outside of perhaps nationalizing the Federal Reserve or taking direct control of it the way Vladimir Putin took control of Russia's central bank. And they've been doing a lot better ever since then. Right now in the United States of America, there are more than 90 million legal American citizens willing and able to work who have not been able to find jobs for months, if not years. That's how bad it is out there. Between 2001 and 2015, California by itself lost over 500,000 jobs to China. And so when you hear about Ford is bringing back 10,000 jobs, it sounds really good, but it's a drop in the bucket of what's really going on out there. And I think we need to really question the move toward automation, because that's taking jobs away. You hear all these retailers who are closing stores and going out of business, declaring bankruptcy. And here's a reality that everybody needs to remember. Your employees collectively are also collectively your customers. If you take their jobs away and you send it overseas or you replace them with a robot, they are not going to have the money to come into your shopping malls and buy whatever it is you're selling. And that's such an obvious reality. It amazes me that our nation's top economic leaders and money junkies don't seem to get it. And they keep pushing in that same direction of, we've got to lower costs, so we're going to fire all of our employees. Where are we going to get customers? Oh, there's always customers out there. No, there aren't, and they got a hard lesson on that these last few years. It was a terrible, terrible holiday shopping season, and they did it to themselves. Now, right now, somebody had an article saying they're expecting Sears may be gone in 2 years' time. Personally, I don't think they're going to make it to another Christmas. It's amazing. All right, now then, getting on over to the European Union and immigration. Poland's PiS party leader, Jarosław Kaczynski, is saying the European Union must reform if it is to survive. And what he's calling for is the exact opposite of what Brussels is talking about. Brussels is talking about a federalized European Union, where all these member nations are reduced to the level of states and all power concentrated in Brussels. And Jarosław is going the other direction. He says you need to strengthen those nation states and reduce the jurisdiction of Brussels. And he's absolutely right. And you need to keep in mind that the European Union was sold to the Europeans as a free trade, free travel bloc, and that was it. That's what they bought into, the ability to travel anywhere in Europe without a passport, the ability to carry out trade within the European Union without tariffs and all this other. That's what they bought into. They never expected to see what happened in Brussels, this metastic super government forming over them. And they got the wake-up call in 2007 with the Treaty of Lisbon, which basically said, aha, we got you now. But the European Union is in trouble. The euro is in trouble. More and more countries are talking about leaving the European Union the way Great Britain is in the process of doing. Angela Merkel, who is still fully on board European Union, New World Order, global government, has actually traveled to Poland trying to keep Poland's government from starting their own move to leave the European Union. Now, as you know, the appeals court in San Francisco just finished hearing arguments on Donald Trump's travel ban. And it is a travel moratorium. It's not a permanent ban. It's only for 90 days. And the corporate media is being very disingenuous when they talk about it's a Muslim ban. No, it isn't. The word Muslim does not even appear in the executive order. It is a ban on travel from specific countries known to be hostile to the United States because we've been bombing them, known to be hotbeds of terrorism. And if you're in one of those countries and you're coming to the United States of America It doesn't matter what your religion is, you will have some difficulty at the border. Whether you are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, Pastafarian, Scientologist, it's going to be the same treatment. It is not, in fact, a case of religious discrimination. If you are coming from a country not on the list, you're not going to have a problem. Canadian Muslims are still flipping back and forth over the border without any difficulty whatsoever. So the judges have heard the arguments, and we're being told they're going to come up with a decision sometime soon. And I can imagine that if they decide that Donald Trump's travel moratorium is in fact constitutional, that we're going to see the snowflakes and the crybabies and the buttercups and especially all of the illegal immigrants start more riots. But the law is on Donald Trump's side. Title 8, Section 1182F, it's 65 years old. It's been used by other presidents. Nobody ever complained about it before. And it states quite clearly, whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may, by proclamation and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. Title 8, Section 1182F plainly authorizes President Trump to declare a temporary moratorium on the entry of classes of aliens for national security purposes, and that's exactly what he did. And he expressly cites that section of federal law in his executive order. And this judge in Seattle was flagrantly ignoring the law in issuing a temporary stay, and may have actually made things worse, because now we're going to get this situation, well, the judge in Seattle says that Trump can't do this, and these other judges said he can. Well, we don't have to listen to the judge. And there's going to be more of this rioting, which I think is part of George Soros' plan for a color revolution in the United States. Because we're seeing all this effort to kick up riots, whether it's at Berkeley or UC Davis or all of these places. New York, NYU, same thing. It's all over. We're seeing the same repeated pattern we saw in so many other countries that have been brought down with the color revolution, such as Ukraine. But I do not think it's going to succeed here. Because anytime anybody wants to change the governmental system, especially something as draconian as bringing down the legitimate elected government and replacing them with a junta, you have to have the popular support of the general population. You must have it. And Soros and these people don't have it. That's what happened when they tried a new color revolution in Iran back in 2009. They weren't able to win popular support, and the whole thing fell apart. And when we see on TV these thugs going on out screaming the F word. Did you see that video? Preschool teacher screaming the F word, saying, "You got to give us your money. We got to start killing people." All of this stuff. That's not going to win the support of the general American population. The American people are getting disgusted by this childish behavior. And if Soros and his color revolution people cannot win the popular support of the general population, this is doomed to fail. The only question is how many people are going to have to be hurt, how much property will have to be destroyed before it's finally brought to an end. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call. Chris in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you, Michael. I thought I'd let you know that from my perspective, that judge that is not obeying the law is likely in treason and judicially making laws and activists from the bench.
Well, a lot of judges like to do that, but they're not actually allowed to do that. And I think the temporary stay, well, he only issued a temporary stay, not a final ruling. And the stay was only until the three-judge appeals panel could hear the case, which they just got done doing. The real issue is going to be if the three-judge appeals panel tries to rule that Title 8 is no longer the law of the land. And they very well might. I mean, unfortunately, our court system has become politicized to the same extent as the corporate media, the university system itself, and who knows what they're going to do.
Well, in fact, it's become an activist judiciary. They become hostile to the American people. They're anti-American. They're actually left-wing terrorists masked as judges. I just left the Las Vegas Lloyd George building on floor 7C, and they had it clearly posted in the lobby that you couldn't take cell phones or electronic devices into the courtroom. However, I wasn't going into the courtroom. I was going to wait in the lobby since I had a cell phone with me for the individual I was looking for to come out. And they changed the policy on the fly. As soon as I got there, they informed me you couldn't have them on the floor anymore. So the policies are changing to adapt to specific discriminatory activities to exclude people who might not be wary of what the regulations are before they arrive, and commonly brought to discriminatory removal or dispatching. I heard they actually arrested one today for not having a credible ID and claimed that he was in violation and arrested him.
Well, it is out of control, and one of the hallmarks of a tyranny and a dictatorship is when you start seeing laws selectively applied, or, as you say, they're just making the stuff up on the spot. And if you refuse to go along with them, you can be in trouble. But under the Constitution, judges are not allowed to just create laws out of thin air. Neither are security guards. And this kind of behavior, if it's tolerated, it leads to the disintegration of society.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. You're spot on. It's important to remember that Gloria Navarro, the Chief Justice here in the Federal District in Las Vegas, is a Harry Reid appointee, an associate terrorist, a true terrorist to the American people, and so I'm not surprised at anything that I see coming out of this particular court. So thank you very much, Michael. I think I'll go now. All
right, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Now then, poll is out showing that only 20% of Europeans are in favor of this migration program. So all of these European Union leaders who are out there saying, yes, we're welcoming the migrants and the refugees, they're not supported by the general population. And right now, the common sense approach is if you're tired of the refugees, it's time to end the U.S. wars of aggression that made them refugees and bring peace to the region and let them go home. That's it. Now, 100 years ago, President Theodore Roosevelt essentially banned Muslim immigration to the United States. Now, in his case, it was a proclamation that banned anybody who practiced or believed in polygamy from coming into the United States of America. And it may have been targeted more on the Mormons than on Muslims. But Muslims, even those who are just have a single spouse, by their religion, believe in polygamy. And so they were affected by Theodore Roosevelt's ban as well. Nobody complained back there. Now, as you know, more than 120 tech companies up there in Silicon Valley signed a legal brief basically opposing Donald Trump's travel moratorium. And it turns out that the costs of putting together this brief and collecting the signatures was picked up by Google, which is getting very, very political. As a side note, a lot of people were asking what had happened to the former CEO of the Clinton Foundation, Eric Braverman. Was he found in Fort Mysie Park? Turns out he's still alive and well, and he is now working for Google. So we can take his picture off the milk carton here. The New York Assembly, following the pattern that's going on out in California, is now considering declaring New York State a sanctuary state, even though it puts New York on a collision course with the White House. California is doing the same thing. It's almost like they're already drawing up the lines for a civil war here. And here's where it gets really bizarre. Out in California, there was a hearing before the California Senate's Public Safety Committee. The Senate President Pro Tem Kevin DeLeon came on out and admitted half of his family is residing in the United States illegally using falsified Social Security cards and green cards. And he's out there saying, if Trump is allowed to move forward with immigration reform, half of my family would be eligible for deportation. Yeah, because they're here illegally. And it's not racist to say this, because illegal isn't a race. It's a legal condition. Now, here's the situation. There is a way to become a legal resident or citizen of the United States. There's a legal process you can follow. And for those who follow that process, welcome. I hope we're not too bad a disappointment to you based on your image of America from movies and TVs around the world. But had Kevin DeLeon's family decided to come in through the legal immigration process, they would not be eligible for massive deportation. These individuals made a bad choice. Of course, in the context of being told, nobody's enforcing immigration anymore, just come on over, get free stuff, vote Democratic, and you'll be fine. Only Hillary lost, and that's why they're in trouble. But they made this decision themselves to violate the laws of the United States of America, and for the President pro tem of the California Senate to get up there and say, feel sorry for us and help us protect these illegal immigrants from deportation, shows you just how dangerous this immigration process has become for the United States of America itself, where you have people who are in violation of the law, in harboring illegal aliens, in positions of power in the state government, because it is illegal under U.S. law to facilitate, conceal, employ, or house an illegal immigrant. And I think this idea that everyone's out there saying, oh, feel sorry for these people, feel sorry for these people. If they don't have good lives where they came from, let them go back home and start to work to make their countries better. I mean, it's not like the United States is a great place anymore. Anybody who's driven down our highways knows how badly our nation is falling apart. I'll tell you one thing I think Donald Trump should do, because he's talking about his infrastructure. I think Donald Trump, using his authority as president, should issue an interest-free currency like John F. Kennedy's United States notes and fund the infrastructure improvements with that. And according to Ellen Brown, that would cut the cost of these infrastructure projects in half. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the immigration problems over there in Europe. Now, a few days ago in Sweden, a police officer who was about to retire and not in fear of losing his job went public saying that the refugees into Sweden have brought with them a huge crime wave, and the authorities are trying to cover it up because they're still pushing this blending of all people together for the New World Order. And this officer was, of course, declared a racist. You know, it's racist to point out that the refugees are committing crimes. Not if they're really committing the crimes. I mean, that's ridiculous here. And so, following that brouhaha, a second Swedish police officer has come on out public saying, yeah, there is a migrant crime cover-up by the Swedish government. And he got support from some other police officers who came out and said, yeah, what this guy is telling you is what's going on. They're having to deal with it every single day. Now, over in Germany, the German government actually passed a law that when Germany's media reports on a crime, they're not allowed to mention if the perpetrator is a refugee or a migrant. Das ist verboten. So, sometimes you have to wonder about these politically correct people. One of the big problems we've been dealing with in this country is that our entire educational system has stopped being about education and has become all about indoctrination, getting you to believe certain things to make it easier to control you. You'll believe in human-caused global warming. You'll believe that corporate media is truthful. You'll believe independent media is a bunch of kooks and nuts and tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorists. You'll believe doctors are always putting your health as the top priority. You'll believe bankers and politicians are honest. You'll believe our government is good and all the other governments are evil. Those beliefs are the chains that hold free minds slaves. And that's not what education is supposed to be for. I mean, I know that was the reality behind the so-called Prussian model of public education. But over in Greece, they've taken it one step too far. They're dumping the teaching of classical texts to make room for students to study gender and sexuality. Because after all, Socrates and Aristotle and Plato, it's just a bunch of old white guys. You don't want to listen to anything they have to say. And they're going to be teaching about sexuality and get everybody confused as to which restroom they're supposed to be using. Again, just practical question. What possible job opportunities are going to open up for these kids with this as their education / indoctrination? It's like the liberal colleges in the United States of America. Those kids are in debt for $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 for their education. How are they ever going to pay it back? You can only have so many art history majors making money. They were almost de-emphasizing job skills that would actually allow them to get out of debt. Science, engineering. It's amazing just how bizarre it really is. Now, apparently over in Denver, there was a tragedy last month. Police officer Scott Von Lankin, 56-year-old, was shot and killed by a gentleman named Joshua Cummings, former U.S. Army sergeant. And what really makes this kind of bizarre is that apparently he had converted to Islam and he'd become radicalized to the point where his own mosque contacted the Department of Homeland Security and said, "You need to watch this guy." And the Department of Homeland Security did absolutely nothing, and this police officer is dead as a result. Your tax dollars at work. Isn't it amazing, all these organizations and institutions within the government that don't actually seem to do their job? Look at all the cybercrime that's all over the country. Ransomware. Where's the NSA? Isn't it their job to be protecting America's IT infrastructure? Don't seem to do much about that, do they? Alrighty, we're coming up on another commercial break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about latest developments out of Fukushima, which for those of you living on the west coast of America and Canada, things are getting a little tense over there. So we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And welcome back to our show here. And we got a lot of stuff to talk about here. I'm going to talk about Fukushima. Now, there are some very troubling developments going on over there. And by the way, I get a lot of email from people who live in the area and say, don't believe the government and TEPCO when they say it's perfectly safe and contained. A lot of people are getting thyroid problems. There are now websites out there that are just nothing but photos of all the deformed and mutated life that's found around this disaster. Now, last week it came on out, a couple of very alarming developments. They detected a record high level of radiation at Fukushima's #2 reactor, 530 sieverts. This is a lethal dose. It can kill you almost instantly. Now, this new record at Fukushima is 70% higher than the worst day at Chernobyl. So this makes Fukushima the worst nuclear disaster in history, not that anybody had any doubt prior to that. Interestingly enough, the last high reading for radiation at Fukushima was read back in March of 2012, and it was only 73 sieverts. So what's going on? Part of the story is they're detecting holes in the foundation of the reactor. There's even concern that it might actually topple over into the ocean, and that some of the melted fuel rods and structures are down in the ground at or even below the water table. Now, the reason this reactor design uses water is not just to transfer heat from the fuel cores to the turbines, the secondary heat exchanger. It's also because the water acts as a neutron moderator, meaning that in the air, neutrons emitted by these fuel rods are traveling too fast to be captured by other uranium atoms, triggering a chain reaction and fission. water will slow them down. And so if the remains of these fuel rods are in fact getting saturated by groundwater, we might be seeing spontaneous, uncontrolled nuclear fission taking place underneath the ruins of this reactor, which would certainly explain why they're getting 530 sieverts per hour. And that is a serious problem. Now, for those of you who might be worrying, there is absolutely no possibility of a nuclear explosion because reactor fuel is enriched to 3 to 4%. Weapons-grade uranium is above 90%. They're far apart. We're not going to see a big, giant explosion, but we are seeing continuing radiation leaks. You ought to take your Google Earth, go over to Fukushima Daiichi, and as you pull out from the reactor complex itself, you will see for hundreds of acres around all of these giant containers. Some are cylindrical, some are rectangular. These are all holding the radioactive waste from trying to cool down the reactors. And it's very dangerous. They're letting some of it go into the ocean. They can't contain it all. If there were to be some kind of a fire at the plant, or an airplane crashing into those containers, or even just another major earthquake that ruptured them, that would be a serious, serious problem. Now, obviously, for those of us living out here in the Pacific, and for those of you who don't know me, I live on the island of Oahu. It's where I am right now. It's obviously an area of concern. We're very cautious about eating the fish out of the ocean. Back when Fukushima happened, I bought a radiation meter. And today, yesterday, I started taking readings again, and it is as hot as it was right after the Fukushima disaster. Now, there is a normal baseline. When you live in Hawaii, you're living on lava from extinct volcanoes, and lava has a natural baseline radioactivity to it. So we have to subtract that out. And it is still at a very, very safe level. But the fact that it's going up is very alarming, and we're going to be keeping a track on that. Now, if you are one of these people concerned about vaccine safety, you are probably familiar with a documentary called Vaxxed. And it shot to notoriety because it had originally been scheduled to be shown at the Tribeca Film Festival, which is co-founded by Robert De Niro, who has an autistic child. And apparently the Tribeca Film Festival's financial sponsors had interests in the pharmaceutical corporations, and they applied pressure to get the documentary pulled from the screening. Same thing happened over at the Houston International Film Festival. Same thing has happened in London with a scheduled screening there. Europe, on the other hand, is a little less tolerant of this cover-up on behalf of corporations. And apparently the European Forum for Vaccine Vigilance is now sponsoring showings of the documentary in many locations around Europe. So word is getting out, even as the corporate media and the medical industrial complex are trying to keep a lid on this. Because vaccines are big business. It's a $30 billion a year business. That kind of money becomes a power of its own. A lot of people talk about the CDC and we can trust them. Not necessarily. The CDC holds patents on more than 20 different vaccines, off of which they make $4.5 billion every year. So it's not entirely certain that they can remain impartial and unbiased, especially when you recall that whistleblower who came forward to say that the CDC's report saying there was no link between vaccines and autism was an absolute fraud. They cherry-picked the data to come to a pre-desired conclusion. Now, over in Italy, there's been a research project using new technologies that has found many commercial vaccines are containing microparticles, nanoparticles of toxic metals, heavy metal contamination. And the issue with the nanoparticles, the volume of material is very, very small, but the fact that it's in nanoparticles increases its surface area where chemical reactions can take place. And so there's a concern there because none of these materials that they found are listed on the ingredients list that comes with the vaccine, the package insert. And that package insert does need to be looked at very carefully. The maker of the DTaP vaccine actually admits it causes autism in their filings with the U.S. FDA. And they're saying this DTaP vaccine, which is diphtheria, tetanus, tetanus, sometimes called the Tripedia vaccine, and it says adverse reactions include idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, which I don't know what that means, but that's on the list. SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. In other words, this DTaP vaccine can literally kill a baby. What happens when the baby gets killed? They don't blame the vaccine. They claim the parents killed it with shaken baby syndrome, and they'll put these parents, already traumatized over losing their baby, into prison to protect that $30 billion a year business. Other side effects, anaphylactic reaction, cellulitis, autism is listed in there. Convulsion, grand mal convulsion. I mean, a whole list of these. You've got to read those package inserts. They don't want you to. They're printed on tiny pieces of paper with almost microscopic print, but by law they're required to have those there. And it's rather alarming to be living in a world in which the medical establishment is all about profitability, even at the expense of the health of the population. Because our medical industrial complex is operating on the same moral level as the traveling Wild West medicine show salesman. We've all seen it in movies and TV shows and even authentic historic photographs. A guy will drive this garishly painted wagon into the middle of town, crank down the rear stage. There'll be a hoochie-coochie girl to draw the crowd in, and then the pitchman goes on out there and says, on the far side of the Great Plains, there is a plague laying waste to the Native American people, and it's coming this way. And unless you buy a bottle of Dr. Mike's Fix-Em, that plague will lay waste to you and your family. It scares the people into buying these bottles full of pepper oil or whatever else is in there. And the people drink the pepper oil, thinking they're saving themselves from a plague that doesn't really exist. The medicine show salesman skedaddles out of town. And that's basically it. Now, Bill Gates is a big supporter of vaccines. He's launching yet another program of fear-mongering to try and get people to take all these vaccines. Bill Gates is on record as saying he wants to use mandatory vaccinations to curb human reproduction, population control. Now, I understand that there's a population problem, and there always will be, because sex is a lot more fun than dying. But the problem I have with everybody screaming for population control is they always want somebody else to die or to go without children. So anytime one of these population people comes up and says, oh, there's way too many human beings, and I say, you know, you could solve the problem. There's a tall building right over there. Feel free to jump off, try and hit a private central banker on the way down. Now then, there's a very alarming development, and it has to do with the oral polio vaccine. Apparently, they have been administering this in India, which formerly did not have polio. And then all of a sudden, these kids who got the oral polio vaccine are coming down with polio. Now, the problem has to do with an idea called an attenuated pathogen vaccination, where they take the pathogen, in this case polio, and they beat it up in a bar fight to weaken it. They put it in the vaccine, and the idea is that when it's injected into your body recognizes it's a pathogen, but it's weak and can't cause any damage, and your body develops antibodies to the pathogen. All will be well. Except it's already been established that the attenuated polio in the vaccine can return to full potency in the body. And that's what's happening here. Now, in the United States, amazingly enough, the medical establishment is out there ordering doctors to never use the word polio when they're describing this sudden rash of illnesses among kids who've been given the oral polio vaccine. they're being threatened. Doctors who mention polio are at risk of losing their medical licenses. That's how hard the cover-up is. Now, as you know, one of the things Donald Trump has done that I absolutely agree with is he's established a vaccine safety commission. And part of the motivation may be his son, Barron Trump, who may be suffering from a mild autism spectrum disorder. And I'm not the only person who's saying that. Roseanne Barr was saying that. She said she recognized the symptoms because she, too, has an autistic child. It's an out-of-control epidemic. 1 out of every 56 children in the United States is diagnosed autistic after they get those vaccinations. At this rate of growth, by 2030, half of the children born in this country will eventually be diagnosed as autistic. That means half of the population will be unavailable to the workforce, and a significant portion of that available workforce will be tied up caring for these autistic individuals, unless something is done now. So Trump is putting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in charge of this Vaccine Safety Commission, and we're already seeing the pushback. Huffington Post, which is very liberal, came on out with a claim that Pew Research Center has found 82% of U.S. adults saying that healthy children should be required to get the triple vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella, in order to attend school. Now, it's that triple shot, the MMR, that seems the most dangerous for autism. And what's really amazing, if you watch that documentary, Vaxxed, and by the way, if you have Amazon Live, you can see it as a pay-per-view. When it came on out that the danger seemed to be the triple vaccine, instead of offering the single-shot vaccine so you could get the mumps shot this week and the measles shot next week and the rubella shot next month, they literally took the single-shot vaccines off the market to remove the possibility of any choice whatsoever. Now, of course, Pew Research, you need to be very, very careful, because they were also running polls saying that Hillary Clinton was going to win last year's election in a landslide. Now, another story, this one coming out of Green Media, greenmedinfo.com. Scientists have now established the link between aluminum and the early onset of Alzheimer's disease. And what they found is, this is Professor Exley, scientist from Keele University in Staffordshire, said the problem is aluminum remains in the body. It accumulates. Your body cannot get rid of it. And it can lead to the early onset of Alzheimer's. I remember years ago when they said you've got to stop using uncoated aluminum cookware. It's a problem. Here's where it gets really weird. Aluminum is used as an adjuvant in vaccines. What are these people thinking about? The mercury-based preservative thimerosal was banned officially in 1999. It's still in the vaccines. It really is out of control. And again, we're seeing the medical industrial complex is trying to get laws in every single state saying you will get a vaccination. And it's not just a vaccination. It's up to something like 37, 38 now. That's a huge, huge burden. And they're going to say, well, the amount of aluminum in a vaccine really isn't that major, and the same thing with the mercury-based preservative thimerosal. Maybe in a single shot, yes, but when you're being ordered by the government to hit your child with 37 different shots, that's a lot of mercury. That's a lot of aluminum. All for the sake of $30 billion a year. Now, you'd think that the pharmaceutical industry would clean up its act, but oh, no, 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 no. Following these scandals of skyrocketing the prices on pharmaceuticals, the PR Association, the Pharmaceutical Researchers and Manufacturers Association, has launched a $100 million advertising campaign called Go Boldly. It's a puff spot. It's corporate image that vaccines are good, and people who make vaccines are good, and people who get vaccines are happy and healthy. And It's absolute pure propaganda, because they don't want to change what they're doing because it maximizes profitability. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our show here, and a very alert listener pointed out, I misspoke, it is Rosie O'Donnell who has the autistic child, and commented on Barron Trump, not Roseanne Barr. So I made a mistake on that. Now then, you need to be very careful about your sources. It's all driven by money. And there's this article that came on out from deeprootsathome.com regarding WebMD, which is promoted as the most trusted online source of health information. And that may not be lasting much longer, because apparently back in 2010, WebMD ran a free online depression test. And as it turned out, the test was rigged so that no matter how you answered the questions, the system would tell you that you're at risk for major depression and you should discuss your options with your doctor. And to nobody's surprise, this fake test was sponsored by Eli Lilly, the maker of Cymbalta, and it was just a hoax to convince you you needed prescription antidepressants. And there is a problem with those antidepressants. First of all, the theory behind the SSRIs doesn't actually seem to work. And if you go over to a website called ssristories.org or ssristories.com, you will find all these case studies of people who've just been driven to bizarre behavior by these medications, or worse, coming off of them. All of the mass shooters, the gun grabbers wave at us, were either on or coming off of those medications. Now, more recently, the government has decided not to release this information, figuring we don't need to know if the medication we're taking for our supposed depression or ADHD might turn us into a cold-blooded killer, because that gets in the way of profitability. But it is a major, major issue. And I had a personal experience with these many, many years ago. I went to my doctor over a completely unrelated issue, and she asked me, how are you doing? Because I was going through the breakup of my first marriage. And I said, well, I'm not entirely cheerful. And she said, well, you need this. She gave me this. I don't even remember what it was. I wish I did. And for about 4 weeks, I was happy, and I was fun to be with, and I was popular. And in the 5th week, I had this horrible, horrible black crash. And the only way I got through it was I just sat there saying, it's just the chemical, it's just the chemical. And I flushed the rest of that stuff, and I will not touch those prescription antidepressants ever again. In fact, I'm getting almost Christian Science in my avoidance of orthodox medical treatments, and I prefer things like good nutrition, natural cures, nano-silver, things I can make myself, and I know what's in there. Because it is just a big money-making operation. And the whole system needs to keep you chronically ill to maximize profits. We've got time for one quick phone call. Steve in California. Aloha, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Michael, I just got back from the Santa Rosa Sanctuary City meeting there. I can give you more of a breakdown of that tomorrow, but I missed a good portion of the show. You mentioned about the drug inserts on the autism for the vaccine.
Yes.
Where can I find that insert?
It's in the box that contains the vaccine, and you have to ask the doctor or practitioner to show it to you, because it's not something they'll normally give you. But when the actual package that comes from the pharmaceutical industry, there is an insert in there with all the contraindications, or you can actually search it up on the FDA's database. It is out there to find, but you have to go looking for it. They're not going to volunteer that information.
That's what I was looking for, because I could, I understand it's in the insert in the box and everything. I thought there was maybe something posted online of the actual insert itself.
I believe that's actually what's at the FDA website there. Anyway, we're coming up on the end of the show, Steve. We're going to let you go here. And, wow, 5 hours of radio. Boy, do I need a coffee. There's the music, and so I'm going to sign off here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network, and have a good evening. We must make America back. Thanks for filling in.